Okay, so because today we sort of have concluded our discussion of Shadim, because the next sif goes on to a, let me just see, oh, no. No, we haven't. No, we haven't concluded our discussion of Shadim, okay? All right. Let us continue. Okay, because I do want to do a comprehensive outline of what Shadim are all about and the different opinions of Shadim. So yesterday, what we were talking about is fish and meat, right? Which really is not really in the realm of Shadim at all. But fish and meat was considered a sakana, a health hazard by the Gemara, not because of some spiritual problem, but rather because who knows, what the perception was. There is an attitude of nishtanu atvayim, that nature changed or medical issues changed over the course of centuries. That's what some Meforshim write. There could have been a certain kind of bacteria that existed in certain species of edible animals, and that doesn't exist anymore. And so let's take a look at the Likutim, because we were talking about a fish in the pot. Let me just share my screen. Here we are. So we said that you're allowed to cook fish in a fleishich pot, right? And we talked about the grill, barbecuing fish on a fleishich grill, and we said that that's a problem unless you use some kind of barrier like one of those Teflon mats. We also, let's see here. Let me just get my bearings in the Likutim, because I think that's where we're up to, if I'm not mistaken. Because I think we had already seen the Imrei Yaakov on the fish. Oh, right, that's what it was. We had just done the Imrei Yaakov on the whole fish issue. That if a piece of fish falls into a cholent, as long as there's shishim, we can consider it to be batal. And that's the thing that we did yesterday. We did the Imrei Yaakov. Now we're going to go up to the Likutim on Siftes, Dag Ubasar. Is that where we're up to? Let me just make sure. Yeah. Dag Ubasar on Siftes. Yeah. So Ayin Imrei Yaakov Shehu Batal B'Shishim. So in the Imrei Yaakov, we mentioned that if fish combines with meat, as long as you have 60 of one over the other, it's batal, just like if with milk and meat, right? V'imika safek im yesh sishim. Now, what if you're not sure whether there's 60 times the meat over the fish? With an Isser deoraisa, you have to be machmir. But with an Isser derabanan, you can be lenient. However, yesh osrim the yesh matirim b'makom menias kavod Shabbos. So some poskim say that you have to be machmir, and the argument being is that even though this is not a rabbinic law, it's not a biblical law, meat and fish, but we have a general principle of chamira sakanta me'isura, that we're more machmir with issues of danger to one's life than we are by prohibited substances. So let's say, you have a poison that would fall into your stew, right? And you want to know if there's shishim to make it batal. You're not going to start saying, well, maybe there is, maybe there's not. What the heck, right? You're going to say, if it's a question of like arsenic, falling into your cholent, you're going to say, I ain't taking no chances. throw the thing out. I don't care, right? So that's the argument to be machmir. But v'yesh matirim b'makom minias kavod Shabbos. But by the same token, we also know that there are many poskim who say that the whole issue of meat and fish being mixed together is no longer an issue. In other words, people generally don't become endangered by the mixture of meat and fish. And therefore, if it's going to cause a mania, a prevention, or an inhibiting of kavod Shabbos, because now we can't have the cholent because someone put into the Worcestershire sauce into the cholent, so then you can be lenient, okay? Vimbishlu dagim bechli, v'nafal ala klimi bachutz marak o shuman basar. Let's say you have fish in a pot, okay, cooking in a pot, and then some soup, some chicken soup or some meat soup or meat fat fell on the outside of the pot of the fish chowder. Af shaleka shishim negdo shari dahavi blieskli. There too you can be lenient because you're only dealing with the absorbed flavor in the walls of a vessel. And when it comes to meat and fish, I guess the rabbis assessed that does not present a health hazard. Kasav harama, de'ein litzlos basar imdag mishum reicha. That the Rama writes that you should not roast meat and fish in the same oven. We talked about this yesterday. You should not have them in the same oven roasting because the reyach, the fragrance or the smell transfers from one to the other. Mihu b'di'eved eino aser. But b'di'eved, if you did it, it's not aser. The kasvu achronim tahad b'di'eved eino aser hanimili b'tanur gadol. And the poskim writes that that's only if the oven is sufficiently large. Abal b'tanur katan, afal pi she'ein nogim zeh bazeh v'lo zav mizeh lazeh chayshinun l'reicha v'aser. But with the small oven, you have to be machmir, even when the two items are not touching each other. But since there's a greater concentration of smell transference from one to the other, you have to be machmir. And from a practical standpoint, we really have to analyze this. It's not clear what our ovens have the status of. If I'm not mistaken, I think that Rav Moshe had said that our ovens have the status of a large oven, but it's really, there's a lot of deliberation in the poskim. But like I mentioned yesterday, as long as one of the items is covered, either the fish or the meat, and certainly if you cover both, then it's totally mutter, even lechatchila. You can have them in the oven at the same time. Kasvu hasfarim, the tov lahafsik, okay. And the last thing is, what the poskim say is that it's proper to interrupt your eating between fish and meat with some beverage. Umayim ein lishtos acher dogim dahavi sakana, but better not, but you shouldn't drink water after eating fish, because that could present a sakana. Now, what kind of sakana could that present? I believe it has to do with lingering bones, little bones in your mouth, that the water could wash them down, and then that could get lodged in your... Apparently not. I don't know. So I don't think that we really go like this anymore. He's quoting Rabbi Kiva Eger, and in the name of Tosfos, in the beginning of Moed Katan, I don't remember this halacha being brought down. I'm sure I must have learned it a long time ago, but I don't remember this, and I don't believe that people are stringent on this matter. People do drink all manner of beverage, even if it's water. Now, well, it depends who you ask. You know, there are some people who say the only beverage that you may drink is a l'chaim, is alcohol, and that's how the minhag of drinking, having a l'chaim between the fish and the meat came about. It's because there's a certain necessity to do it, so that you do what's called kinuach and hadacha. You wash out your mouth from the flavor of the fish to avoid the sakana. Well, you may ask, but ain't they going into the same place, right? They're going down, they're going into the hole, and they're going to be mixed in my gut. So what difference does it make if there's really a sakana? I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. It could be that the fear was not that sakana was the actual chemical mixture of the meat and the fish, but maybe if you mix meat and fish, their bones are of different size, and maybe the meat might mask a small bone in the fish. Maybe that was the concern. It's really unclear from the language that we have before us what exactly was the health concern. But if it has to do with simply mixing them chemically together because of bacterial concerns or other concerns, then it seems like just eating them one after the other is not going to solve that problem. Yes, Paul.
It's really a physiological rather than a spiritual concern. We would look to a wide population of say, if medical practice say don't do this. And if it doesn't say it, then you no longer have a concern.
Yes, you and that's actually what some posts, the position that some rational posts can take. In other words, when I say rational, I mean that they think that this halacha is based on purely medical concerns that we can identify. And once modern medicine has put to rest the concern about meat and fish, you don't have to worry about it anymore. But what if I were to tell you that there are some poskim who say that the Jewish physiology is different from the non-Jewish physiology, right? So then you say, well, just because goyim, there is a Gemara like that talks about pig meat, that because Gentiles eat pig meat, they have a stronger constitution than Jews. If I'm not mistaken, I forget where that Gemara is, but it is somewhere, and right, but that's the point, is that we really don't have a good handle on a lot of this stuff. And it is curious that this halacha is cited by the Rav Shulchan Aruch in the same context as talking about shadim, okay, which again, it could be, or at least it could be that he understands it that way. Okay, now let's take a look. So the next point that he says about meat and fish is as ubasar yesh omrim the dafka al yedei bishul mamash aval al yedei iroi mikli rishon yesh lahakel bazeh. He says that there are some people who say that it's only when you cook the meat and fish together that it's problematic. But if you just pour, let's say, fish sauce over meat, and they haven't been cooking together, then you can be lenient. And what if you only pickle them together? You take some fish brine and you mix it with meat. Is that a question? He says, we're not sure if that's an issue or not. Dafka dagu basar, aval dagim chema o im gvina ein lachush. All right, back to Moshe's. He says, your point. He says, the only problem that is codified in the Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Pei Zayin, is the mixing of meat and fish. But fish and butter, or fish and cheese, is certainly not a problem. B'dag hamavushal b'chalav yesh chosheshim. There is a minority opinion that is concerned about fish cooked in milk. Aval gam zeh ein less or kevin dedashu bo rabin. But there's no reason to be machmer, says the Pischei Tshuva, because the public has already, like you said, Paul, the public has already experimented with this, and no one has become sick, or I shouldn't say no one, I'm sure someone has become, but the vast majority of people do not become sick by eating a mixture of fish cooked in milk or milk. Well, we don't have necessarily evidence for that. Let's say everyone eats fish and milk together and it hasn't proven to be harmful to them. Harmful in what way? Harmful spiritually, harmful physically? We don't know. But the fact is that once it's been done so many times and people have no adverse side effects, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Right. Could be. I don't know. So Ayin Imrei Yaakov. So I refer you to the Imrei Yaakov, the plitas kalim ein lesser ben dagim lebasar o ibcha. That there's nothing wrong with cooking fish in a fleishach pot or vice versa, because we're not worried about the absorbed flavor getting into the item. That does not present a hazard. The imchatach davar charif b'sakin basar v'rotza lihishtamesh imo ledagim. Let's say I cut an onion, okay, with a fleishach knife. And we know that halachically that causes the flavor of the meat to permeate into the onion. Now I want to use that onion with fish. Now this would be a very common situation. And here you can't rely on the fact that it's Eino ben Yomo, and that it's not, that the flavor is 24 hours old, which is less of a problem because we have a principle that with a davar charif, with a spicy item like an onion, it's choser v'neyor, that the flavor gets reinvigorated. And so it's like you mamish have the flavor of meat in this onion now, and you can't really use it. Certainly to use it for milchiks, you can't, that's usser. And that could actually even be a problem with the evet. But what about mixing it now with fish? And that's a very common issue. My wife usually makes the gefilte fish with the fleishach utensils, and she cuts up an onion and wants to put it in the water that she's cooking the gefilte fish in. We have an issue here. So, im bishel chometz b'chli basar, v'rotza litno b'dagim, he says, and then you cook, or let's say another example is you're cooking a vinegary brine, let's say, in a fleishach vessel. So that also is we're going to say choser v'neir, that's going to invigorate the flavor in the walls of the vessel. And now you want to add that to your fish. Yesh machmirim bazeh. So there are those who are machmir, the darchei tshuva. Ulam gam bazeh minhag ha'olam lahakal. But the general minhag is to be makel, and that's why my wife is okay for doing it. Just don't tell her that there's even some people who are machmir, because then she's not going to cut up onions anymore. V'hu adin le'inyan matchenet basar shetochenim sham basar im batzal v'shuv tochenim dagim im batzal. And the same thing is that, let's say you have a grinder that is fleishach, and you also want to now use it for fish, and you grind up. Well, let's say you have the the thing where, how do you make the gefilte fish? You put it through a grinder. Yeah, so you take the fish and you put it, or the old style ones, right? And then you mix it and you grind it together with fish. And some people do it with meat also. So you make your meatballs, spicy meatballs in there, and you make your chopped liver in there, and you make your gefilte fish in there. So that's also, he says, you can be makel. You can be totally makel. You don't have to worry about any concerns. And that's our minhag, is to be makel. Okay. Also, you should know, I was very concerned. I called up one of Rav Scheinberg's shamoshim many years ago. I found a Pri Megadim that says that if you cut an onion with a fleishach knife and you eat just the onion, you don't eat anything fleishach, like you cut up an onion with a fleishach knife and you mix it with your egg salad, let's say. The Pri Megadim says you have to wait 6 hours before you can eat dairy. It makes you fleishach. So I panicked and I called Rav Scheinberg. I was living in Israel at the time, and he says, "No, we're not knowing like that, Pri Megadim. You don't have to wait 6 hours." In other words, there are times when you can be, just because you find, let's say, one commentary that says something, that doesn't now make it law. You have to know how to put it in its proper context. So we're generally lenient, with matters of milk and meat with utensils. You don't have to worry about it, even not only with cooking utensils, but also cutting utensils with sharp items like onions and lemons and things like that. So chill out, basically what he's telling us. Okay. All right. So that concludes our discussion of Siftes, and then we'll start Sif Yud. Asur la'amod bifnei hanashim b'shah shechozros min hames. You're not allowed to stand in front of the women when they return from the dead. Now, what in the world is this talking about? So the Gemara talks about the Sophidot, the women who were the or the Masafidot. I don't remember the exact language. That they would, or the Makonanot, they would do dirges, or they would raise their voice and crying, like the Sephardim. And the women would actually, this would arouse cries from the audience. This was in the ancient world, that's what was done. And it's fallen into disuse. But that's what we're really talking about. If you have a group of women who were, let's say, hired to make noise in order to arouse people to tears, so they're walking in the funeral procession. When they come back from the cemetery, don't stand in front of them. Why? Because the angel of death is dancing in front of them, and he has permission to injure anyone who gets in their way. Very strange, okay? Because the Malach HaMaves comes and Ole Umastin, he'll go up to Shemayim and he'll prosecute against you. And then when permission is granted to him, he'll come down and take a soul. Now, it could be, why specifically women? Why not men? It could be because there's a suggestive issue here of, the fact that it's mixed genders, and that's one thing, and then they just came from death, and that's another thing. And when you put those two together, it gets really creepy, and scary and spooky, whatever you want to say. And that's why that you should stay away from this, because the Malach HaMaves is going to take advantage of the situation. V'chein kishaholchos achar hameis lo yifka otan panim el panim. And similarly, when they're following the funeral procession and making their noise, don't confront them face to face. Ela yelech me'achareim o lifnehem. But walk either directly behind them or directly in front of them, but don't look at them during the procession. Uv'chazirato yelech b'derech acheres shelo yifka osan. And when you come back from the cemetery, walk a different way so that you don't encounter them. V'impaga mata kanaso. And if you do encounter them, what's the remedy? Yedaleg mimekomo daled amos. Leap across from where you are to a place that is 4 amos away. Im yesham nahar ya'avrenu. And if there's a body of water, cross over the body of water. O im yesham derech acheres yelech ba. If there's another way that you can walk, take that path. Just get out of there. Hightail it out of there. The im yesham koisel ya'amod acharei hakosel ad sheyavru. And if there's a wall that you can walk behind, hide behind the wall until they pass. V'im lav yachzer panav. And if not, turn your face away. V'yomar pasuk. And say the following pasuk. Now we have an incantation. As it says, Vayomer Hashem el hasatan, yigar Hashem becha hasatan, v'yigar becha Hashem habocher b'Yerushalayim, halo za'ud mutzal me'esh. And it's a pasuk that you say when you're in danger, that God will save you. It's a pasuk in Zechariah, if I'm not mistaken. Ad sheyavru kulan, until they all pass by. V'im ein sham sheva nashim ein lachosh kol kach. But if there's not 7 women involved in this procession of the Makonanos, so then you don't have to worry as much. Very strange, very bizarre. This is part of it, this is a Gemara in Brachos, but part of it is from the Zohar, and most of it is actually from the Zohar. Okay, so therefore it's all mystical, and we don't have really a full, and it's probably not a concern so much anymore. Okay. Um, okay, this really is the end of the spooky stuff. Uh, so I would like to begin a discussion with you having to do with some of the responsa that are post-Talmudic on Shaden. And so let me just bring this up. And we'll be spending a couple of days on this as well, because I have all of the sources. If you go to KosherTube on YouTube, um, you'll discover. Let me bring this up. I'm going to skip a whole bunch of this stuff because there's just so much. Okay, let's take a look at the Rambam. The Rambam was not a big fan of all this stuff. In his Mishnah commentary on Maseches Avodah Zarah, the Rambam writes as follows: Mima shiroi sheteidaehu, something that is worth your knowing. Shahafilosofim hashleimim enam ma'aminim betaliz ma'ot, that the philosophers who are complete in their knowledge do not at all believe in talismans. He says, but they mock them, and they mock those people who believe in their influence. He says, we could go a lot into this. He says, Sharov b'nei ha'adam v'ulai kula merumim bahem tarmit gedola me'od. He says, but I have to acknowledge that most people, and maybe all of them, are suckered into these beliefs. Uvaharbe dvarim misugam, and many other kinds of superstitious beliefs. V'yachshavum dvarim amitiyim ve'einam kain, and they believe in a lot of this superstitious nonsense, but it's not true. Ad shahatovim hachasidim me'anshe torasenu choshvim shehem dvarim amitiyim ela shehem asurim biglal haTorah bilvad. He says there are many people who believe that magic and sorcery and witchcraft and spirits, that they're real, and the Torah prohibits our practice of the occult because it wants to ban us from doing prohibited actions, not because there's any falsehood about them. They're real. Magic is real, but you're not allowed to practice it. But the reality is that when the Torah tells us do not practice magic, it's not telling us don't practice magic because it's real. It's telling us don't practice magic because it's bubamaisis. It's nonsense. And it's yeah. So the Rambam says, a woman who practices magic is really doing nothing, but she's leading people astray from religion through her occult practices, and that's her danger. Not because there's anything real to her witchcraft. Vehem dvarim shezachu lepirsum rav eitzel haumos b'shoresh zeh hatzava. He says the reason why these things became so popular in modern culture is because of the tzava, which was an ancient culture. The word Aram Sova is probably a derivative of that, which is Assyria. It's a Middle Eastern cult that existed in the biblical and post-biblical period that were very much into these kinds of occult practices. Vehem ha'amim asher yatsa Avraham Avinu michlalam v'cholak al deoteim hanifsadot. He says this is the culture that Avraham emerged from, and he dissented from them. Because God granted him wisdom. He was able to discern that they were full of baloney. But these Tzava people were the ones who exalted the stars and attributed to them um, uh, um, influences that they don't really have. They're the ones who established the beliefs in the influence of the stars, magic and incantations, the horadat haruchniut, and all different kinds of being able to channel spiritual forces, the sichot hakochavim, and the conversations of the stars, the hashedim, and demons. They invented this discussion of demons, the hakesem, the hanichush, l'chol riboy mineihem, and all different kinds of superstition and occult practices, each one according to its kind. Udrishat hametim and necromancy. V'harbe me'ela ha'inyanim asher sholfa haTorah hamitis chareva alehem b'karsa osam. All of these practices, which the Torah sort of draws its sword and says, get away from this stuff, V'heim shoresh avodah zara va'anafa, and they're also the root of avodah zara. So there you have it. You have the rational approach of the Rambam, and he includes Shadim in this discussion. Not so fast, folks. We're not going to be so quick to dismiss Shadim, but at least you've seen the Rambam's position. We will continue this, Amir Tzashem, next week, and we'll talk